You are about to watch a video about hair loss by one of the world's leading hair loss YouTubers. That's no jive. Let's check out this comment that I received on a video I made called Receding Hairline, Diffuse Thinning My Hair When I Wake Up. Imagine if you're Nick Shell, you can literally wake up in the morning on a Saturday morning, hit record on your camera, talk for 12 minutes about how your hair looks, and lots of people will watch and like the video. Meanwhile, if you're Nick Shell, if you try to talk about something actually intelligent, then people won't care about that. Like, for me, this is interest just off the top of my head, right? It's like, consider like with abortion, for example, babies who don't get aborted become born. And then often, because they're born into broken homes and to parents who weren't ready for them, or no dad in the picture, whatever, those babies end up getting adopted or end up in foster care. And the irony is they're often, by default, who's adopting those kids? Often gay couples. And I think that's interesting and fascinating and weird and ironic, because the same people who don't want the babies aborted also wouldn't want a gay couple to adopt a child. But ultimately, it's creating more babies to be adopted by gay couples. I think that's fascinating. And by the way, just for the record, I am a Christian guy who is 100% against abortion. I'm also 100% against gay people being discriminated against. So it takes a guy like me to be able to see both sides from the middle and think, hey, that's fascinating. But you know what I just did? I wasted a lot of your time right now. You didn't want to hear about that. That's like important, deep stuff. You want me to talk about hair loss? Let's do that. All right, here we go. So by the way, I'm a hair loss entertainer. I am no expert, so I think it's hilarious when people get mad at me that, well, you're an expert. You claim to be an expert, and then they type me this long paragraph, and then they start naming exceptions to the rules. So I'm just going to start this video out by saying, look, if you're focused on the exception to the rule, then you're missing the whole point of the video. The whole point is I'm making a generalization. Because if it's true, at least the slight majority of the time, we might want to pay attention to that pattern, because that is more likely to be our future instead of the exception to the rule. With that being said, I made a video called Receding Hairline, Diffuse Thinning My Hair When I Wake Up. Like I said, Declan Flynn, here's this question. Quote, "Hi Nick, talking about hairy guy and beard theory. What age would it be normal to grow a beard? And how much hair at a young age is likely linked to hair loss?" So, good question. I love it. I love talking about this because I'm one of the few men in the world who openly talks about the connection between the ability to grow facial hair and body hair young in conjunction to premature hair loss. In case you don't know, the reason I'm aware of this and observed it, while I was in college, I spent 2 summers teaching English in Thailand. Those students that I had were fascinated by my body hair. They were fascinated by the fact I had facial hair, that they could actually see my arm hair and like put their fingers through it. You know, they would touch. In their culture, it wasn't weird, and they were fascinated by my body hair. And then in turn, though, I noticed that I would look at men in Thailand and they were 50, 60 years old, and I mean, maybe they were like I am for hair. I mean, not this quote perfect head of hair, but they weren't like, to be that old, they weren't noticeably balding. Where in the United States, once a guy hits 40, if he has more hair than me, then he's lucky. That was my perception based on what I've seen. So I thought, wait a minute, it looks like there's a connection here, as in, because these guys, didn't have much hair on their arms or legs or face or chest, and they'd look at me and I'm like Chewbacca. So then I realized, hey, I bet there's a connection here. So here's the generalization. And by the way, again, anyone who leaves a comment to tell me about the exception to the rule, you're missing the whole point, and your IQ is not high enough to watch this video if you're going to focus on the exception to the rule. We're looking for generalizations here. So here we go. To answer your question, I would say this. If by age 16 you have a full beard that's for the most part connected by age 16, I think you're more so in the category to end up like me. And granted, I'm 38, I'm almost 40. But, you know, I don't have, quote, a perfect head of hair. for a lot of people that watch my channel think that I have the right amount of hair, I'm the perfect candidate for a hair transplant. Go ahead and stop it before it gets any worse. I will never do that. And I've made videos explaining why. But I would say, you know, for me, I pretty much had a full connected beard at age 16, 17, something like that. And a lot of guys could barely struggle to have a, you know, any dusty mustache and kind of chin goatee thing. For me, I could have a full beard when I was in high school. And I've noticed that guys like me who grew a beard sooner than later, like while they're still in high school, are the ones who look like this now or balder. But in general, when you, and I've interviewed many guys like this on my channel before, men who are basically late 40s, 50s, even 60s, that still basically have, and they have more hair than me now, but they're older than me. I interviewed them and I asked them, at what point did you have like a full connected beard that you could shave? And always the same response they always had, oh man, it was embarrassing. I don't think I could grow a full beard until I was nearly 30. That's what they all say. So in general, the later it takes you to be able to have a full beard and you know, hair under your arms and hair in your chest, if you're a late bloomer when it comes to that, you're much less likely to end up looking like me at age 38. So don't think of it as a bad thing if you don't have much body hair or facial hair, because then you're less likely to look this way. But on the opposite side of the spectrum, if you're the guy that's already still in high school and shaving a full beard and have hair everywhere else in your body, best case scenario, you'll still have this much hair when you're 38. Worst case scenario, you may be the guy who doesn't have much hair left by the time he's 25. Do I have to say it one more time just to be sure? I understand there are exceptions to the rule, and I don't care at all about that. I always want to know what's the general rule, because that's what I can learn from. I'm Nick Shell. I try not to learn from other people's mistakes. I try not to have to do my own research if I can learn from other patterns that already exist. I'm Nick Shell. I generalize things. I look at, in general, how do things work. Because if I were putting money on it, I'm more likely to win money on the thing that happens the majority of the time instead of the minority of the time. With that being said, I don't gamble. So that analogy is kind of lost on me, which, let me tie this up with this. I've already said this in one video, but let me just say it again. I think it's so funny. Actually, my hair is all messed up. I'm gonna wear a cool hat for this closing story. So what's funny is, a couple days ago I made a video talking about gambling, and I was talking about the generalization that basically for people who gamble, basically for the people who regularly gamble are lower income people. People who are closer to poverty are more likely to gamble regularly. And I said, it's like they're paying an extra tax that the rest of us are not. They make less money, but yet more of a percentage of their income goes to lotto tickets. And that seems unfair to them. I mean, it's their choice. They're choosing to do that. But in their mind, they think this is how I'm going to get ahead financially, is by giving a percentage of my money to the lotto. And yes, it does help the schools and all that. But ultimately, it's like it's taking away from the poor and giving to the middle class or the rest of us. And so I basically said, yeah, it's like a tax that poor people pay when they buy lotto tickets regularly. And then I compared the casino to a bank. You know, the whole concept of the bank, you take your extra money that you've saved, you put it in there, you invest it, you let it grow interest, right? But if you're in that mentality of buying lottery tickets, you're probably the same person who has a mentality that will take you to the casino regularly. And you take that money and you invest it in the casino to try to turn a profit. Most of the time, obviously, that's not going to work. So that's pretty straightforward. People who make less money are more likely to gamble. They're more likely to spend on lottery tickets. They're more likely to go to the casino. It's the opposite of something a guy who's really good at managing and making and investing money. I know better than that. I'm the opposite of that mindset. But people in that place in life, that's generally how it is. With that being said, and this video wasn't even popular, this guy leaves a comment and he says, no, you're highly wrong. And he tells how his grandfather was the Texas Hold'em champion, you know, back in the 80s or whatever it was. And how his, you know, he basically, I guess his grandfather is basically a millionaire because he was so good at gambling. And he grew up dirt poor. So this guy says, I'm highly wrong, and then he gives an extreme exception to the rule. So I just commented back and said, well, clearly your grandfather was an exception to the rule. But see, that's how so many people are wired. They hear a generalization and they're so eager to prove the person wrong, when clearly I'm admitting it's a generalization. There are absolutely going to be exceptions. So ultimately, what does that say about a person when they're so quick to jump to the exception of the rule? Well, ultimately, they're missing the whole point of what I'm trying to share and what we can learn from that generalization, which I'm not afraid to generalize. A lot of people are afraid. No, I think it's a good thing to generalize, as long as it's not meant as a negative attack against someone and there's not something we can learn from that. That's what I feel about generalizations. But ultimately, it's called high conflict personality. It's when a person is very eager to debate with someone and prove them wrong. Because by proving them wrong, they think that it'll make that person respect them more. I proved you wrong, now you gotta respect me. In reality, it doesn't work that way. If you try to prove someone wrong, you get the backfire effect. They don't respect you because you're trying to prove them wrong. Now, it's a matter of being able to teach them something new, just like I taught you something new. Another generalization that I've made popular on my other channel, Family Friendly Daddy Blog, is this. And by the way, a quarter of my DNA and heritage goes back to Mexico. Yes, I'm, quote, a quarter Mexican. I noticed, and I made videos about this, here in Nashville especially, we have one of the highest percentages of homeless people in the United States. But yet, and I see homeless people all the time back where I used to live, all the time selling newspapers, bagging all this stuff. I never once saw a Mexican homeless guy, ever. Never. And I started, making videos asking why that is. Well, typically, they're here in this country, whether legally or not, to make money. And they work hard. They work harder than the rest of us, often. They take the jobs that no one else wants, and they do them. And not to mention, they have a very strong family culture, so they're not going to let one of their own end up in the street begging for money. They're going to squeeze them in the house if they have to, however many people in that. Is that a negative stereotype, what I just did? I don't think so at all. I think it's quite accurate. I'm not afraid of the PC police, right? That's how it works. There's a reason I've never once seen a Mexican homeless person, ever. You don't see homeless Hispanics, even. I'm willing to say that, but especially Mexican, because that's what I see the most of in Nashville. They're not homeless. And that's not a coincidence. And yes, that's a generalization. And even now, some of you are tempted to tell me about the Mexican homeless guy you saw because you want to prove me wrong and gain my respect. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. That's not how this relationship works. Here's how this is going to work. I'm going to make generalizations about hair loss. There are exceptions, but let's focus on the general because that's what we can actually learn from. Meanwhile, if you're wanting to prove someone wrong, go to a different channel. You're not going to get the hair loss help that you need. I'm here to help men psychologically overcome hair loss. And you think, but Nick, so much of this video wasn't even really about hair loss. I know, because I know what your real needs are. You don't simply need someone to always be talking about hair loss. You also need someone to be teaching you things about life that only a 38-year-old man can know, not a 16-year-old boy. Now, go ahead and leave those comments.